Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Our guest today is Jason Crum. Jason's been on the podcast before, and here's a quick introduction before I let Jason introduce himself. Jason is a phenomenal engineer. I've worked with Jason more than once over the years, starting many years ago. That's just a brief introduction to Jason. He's another developer and engineer just like myself. Hey, Jason, thanks for again taking the time to having this conversation. I'll introduce the topic in a second, but if you could just say hello to the audience and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hello, happy to be here. I was in a previous life just a few months ago. I was an enterprise architect, and now I am getting back into doing software development full time. So we'll see where things go.
Awesome. Jason, so the topic for today is loosely speaking, right? At least, when we publish the podcast, maybe come up with a fancy way to describe the topic, but here's the crux of it. Impact on AI, the impact of AI on software developers. More specifically, when I reached out to you, I had mentioned that I seen a video recently where, if memory serves me right, I had seen one of the Anthropic founders had mentioned, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he said that in the next 3 to 6 months, AI is going to be able to do, again, don't quote me on this, but I'm going to remember some of the numbers that he mentioned, but somewhere along these lines. The next 3 to 6 months, 90% of everything that a developer does, AI can do. And before the end of the year, like before 9 months from today, like as of the time of this recording, which is March 2025, AI is going to be able to do 100% of what a software developer does. Now, this is an impactful statement to everybody, I reckon, but to us as engineers. But, if the statement is true for software developers, I want to believe that this statement is going to have to be true for a number of other roles and different fields as well, right? So it's not necessarily specific to just us, but the statement, anyways, regardless, was about software developers. So that's the topic. And before we get deeper into it, I want to get your first thoughts on it. You agree? You disagree? What are your initial reactions?
My first thoughts are, granted, he could be operating from, like, he's got internal knowledge of some of the new models and stuff that they're working on within Anthropic. But we've heard this time and time again. Every week, somebody else comes out with these types of statements since the unveiling of ChatGPT. And so I'm skeptical, and my first initial thought is bullshit.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Why? Where does it skepticism stem from?
Well, so it's a matter of like looking at the incentive structures for the people that are making these statements. By and large, you hear the most, we'll say, bullish statements around AI, and in the next few months, in the next couple of years, and the most bullish statements are usually by VCs who have a huge investment in AI companies. They are founders themselves of AI companies, or you have these idiots on LinkedIn and YouTube that are really just that they're trying to sell something, either their influence or, hey, I want views on my channel so I make money. That those are the people that are really making these statements. When you get down to people that actually use the tools and who are, especially in the software development realm, the software developers who use these tools kind of go, yeah, it's cool, but it's not there. I do think that there is opportunity to really make software development easier, we'll say. But in terms of completely replacing all software engineers, 100% of development by the end of this year, again, if he's got a brand new model that they internally into Anthropic, that is far and beyond everything else that's out there, then that might be, if they've got that, he might be speaking from that. But if he's just simply talking about AI in general and trying to hype up the next version of Claude, That's really what I think a lot of this stuff is that it's generating buzz in order to in order to hype up their particular product, especially because of all of the changes that have been happening when you see DeepSeek, the newer versions of OpenAI, the stuff coming out of X with Grok and Olama and all those types, or sorry, Llama. Like he's got to keep the buzz at a particular level. So anyways, that's my general perspective on it.
I think
I'm open to being wrong. I hope I'm not, but
I think that you said a number of things, right? I'm going to try and make notes. I'm not good at doing this while chatting with somebody, but I'll do it to the extent I can because I want to come back to some of these items. And my hope here is to, in the next 45 minutes to an hour, delve into a number of different facets of this topic, right? To start with the foundation like we just did. But, I personally also have a lot of these opinions and thoughts, but there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. The idea behind having these conversations is to get other perspectives. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So you've sort of kicked this off. So thank you for that. Now let's talk about some of the things you mentioned. And I think the parts where that directly resonated with me was there's two ways, right? In the professional life, and I know don't want to speak for you, but I think you're similar in those ways because you're an engineer, I'm an engineer as well. And a lot of the people listening to this podcast or watching it, depending on which format they consume, are going to be in the space of engineering, whether they're developers or architects or product managers or testers or DevOps people, but folks who are in the business of engineering for the most part. And we do some finance podcasts too, but for the most part, they are engineers. So this will directly relate to folks who are watching or listening to this. When I wear two different hats, one is as somebody who's building software, right? Who's like, hey, you know what's out there? What can I be using out of these models, whether it's Anthropic or other models on Amazon, or Llama or any of these things, right? What's kind of happening in the AI world? And for that matter, I actually created an audio podcast where I'm trying to talk just AI. But the idea was to just explore, understand what's out there, and see how we can better do what you're doing, leveraging whatever it is that's available that was not available previously, right? The year before or 2 years before. So that's me playing the role of a developer who's trying to be more productive. And you alluded to that, right? How does it help improve our productivity using some or a combination of these tools? And I'm going to share my opinions on what I've run into in those cases. The other hat that I that I end up wearing is somebody who's not in the non-professional world, where you're not a developer. You're somebody who's consuming the news that's out there in the larger world, right? You go to New York Times, you're reading what's happening. You're just as though you forget what your job is, what your role is, what company you work for, and all of that stuff. And you're just a human that exists on planet Earth, but who does happen to exist and live in the US. Because I say that specifically because that plays a role as well, right? So different parts of the world, you're subject to different kinds of information. So there's two different hats as I see it. When I wear the second one, where I'm not a developer, when I hear this, I want to talk about that a bit and get your thoughts before we go to the next one. I'm like, oh my God, this is scary. Everything's in anywhere you go, look, even if you're not looking for engineering, you're not going to TechCrunch, right? You're going to, random places that don't have anything to do with engineering, but you're subject to news that's related to AI. Even if it doesn't go into the details of the LLMs and SLMs and, all of those technicalities of AI, you still read about how content writing has changed. Creative writing has completely changed. Like Hollywood was on strike for like 6 or 8 months for long periods of time before they came to some agreement where they have to say that this is generated by AI and not by human or something along those lines. So when I wear the other hat as somebody who's not a developer and look at it, I'm like, genuinely, it is, you're excited and concerned. It depends on your personality, right? Me, I'm excited to know what's going on, right? I mean, this could have happened 20 years down the road and you'd have seen our lifespan through, right? You'd be close to retirement in 20 years, maybe, right? Hopefully, I should say, right? And you wouldn't be able to benefit from this. So I'm happy and excited in a sense that in the middle of your career, you're subject to this excitement that's going on and you want to be part of it and you want to have some part of that. But you're still sort of anxious as well. But that's me not being a developer. If you were if you were to play that role, Jason, as a non-developer, like not from a job perspective, as somebody who's just walking down the street in Anchorage, and you run into a piece of paper or news, or you're reading something and that says AI is taking away all, coming for every job out there, that's out there. What is your reaction to that? Not from a developer standpoint, but from AI in totality.
So the biggest problems I have with the field of AI, and I really don't consider, and maybe it's just because I haven't delved too deeply into this, but I don't consider what's out there right now to be artificial intelligence. And even the artificial general intelligence and all that type of stuff, I they're generative. They're language models, or you have the vision and the audio stuff, which is great at copying things, but not really great at things that haven't existed yet. I would say, as just kind of one way to put it. I know it's not entirely correct, but those are the words that are coming to my mind. I think, but in general, I do think that there are societal impacts that we have to be thinking about with these types of technologies, and especially because of the rate of change and the rate of the impact of that change. If you go back to the Industrial Revolution and the all of that you're not talking massive shifts in the economy as well as in the culture within days, weeks, or months, or you're talking like decades for a lot of those changes to really kind of impact society as a whole. As opposed to today, like the release of ChatGPT several years ago, and it just completely shifted everything, like almost immediately. And so the rate of change and the rate of impact of people rate of impact to people from these technology shifts is exponential, we'll say, compared to where it was 100, 150 years ago, 200 years ago. And I do think that really at the end of the day, if the predictions of these VCs and the CEOs of these AI companies and stuff really come true, what you're going to end up with is 10, 15, 20 people who have all the money. I mean, they are going to be hundreds of billions, trillionaires, and everybody else is, unless you're talking like manual labor, which even then, if Musk has if his vision is fulfilled, especially with Optimus, and you have the robotics that then have the AIs that can go in and do all the manual labor work that we do. I fear for where that will take society, because you end up with a bunch of people, with the vast majority of people who end up purposeless in life. They have no purpose, and not everybody's going to be an artist, especially if you have AI that are generating art, I mean, generating music and all that type of stuff. And I know I'm kind of rambling on here for a little bit, but especially if you go back and you look at what was happening to people and when they were locked up during COVID, and kind of that general malaise that was going on. And I fear that if the CEOs and venture capitalists of all these AI companies, if their predictions come true, I just think we're in for some dark times for a little while it takes people to get onto the other side of it.
You mentioned a few things. I jotted down here. I want to go through each of them, but just going back to my question before I go there, Jason, is, as a non-developer, when you read this, where do you stand? Are you anxious, concerned, worried, happy, excited, ecstatic? What would be your, when you read something like this, where do you fall?
I fall in the skeptical. I don't believe it. If I do take that tact of, okay, assuming this is true, then that's where from not necessarily for my job or my kids' jobs, I'm thinking about it, the larger societal impact of, if you have, we have 7.5 billion people on the planet. If 7.4 billion people are out of jobs because of robotics and AI, like, we're not to the point of Star Trek yet. I mean,
right. No.
So like, there's going to be some massive upheaval from if you wipe out all those jobs. So and I don't know what that looks like.
Good point, right? The second part of what I was going to ask there is, let's say if I know you said you're a skeptic in this case, but let's say I force you to not be one and say, Jason, you cannot be a skeptic. You're going to have to accept this and give me a timeline regardless, right? So in your mind, are you saying, you know what, Anthropic founder says 6 to 9 months? I don't agree. It's maybe 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20.
Mhm.
What would be your ballpark estimate on when this is starting to make a seismic, sizable, impactful impact on our daily lives?
I don't know. I I I do not have an answer to that question. I do think it's further out than I think you're probably looking at 5 plus maybe 10 years for it to have the massive impact. Again, there could be things that people are working on that we don't know about, but um, it, it, I think it's further out than just a couple of years. But I do think that there are, even with the models the way they are today, you do have societal impacts in terms of all the garbage that gets created because people like a lot of people are lazy. They're looking at trying to generate buzz and all that type of stuff. They're generating content which is just full of nonsense. If you take it out of the coding side, you've got crap that is generated from on YouTube that is just all AI generated stuff, and all they're doing is just ripping off other content creators and then creating new videos based off that, and then just repurposing, repackaging something else that somebody actually took the time and effort and the brain power to go through and create. So you end up where you have a flood of nonsense content that is, or
Jason,
even just false content.
I want to interview that because, and people are watching this might be like, Krish is just complaining, but maybe I am. It takes a lot of effort to creating meaningful content. Right? So just to go back to the last statement that you just said, right? Now, I'm not trying to make a judgment on anyone's content, but here's my opinion for what it's worth. Right, even whether it's a podcast, when you're collaborating, right, we coordinate with people. I'm like, hey, what time works for each of us? We come up with a topic, think about it, have a chat about it. Hopefully it benefits other people. But there's a fair bit of thinking that goes into it, right? That's
Yep.
just the way things work. Not to glorify anything, but I'm just saying that's my experience. And when I'm doing my standalone content, it's doing hands-on work. I still have to kind of play with that tool, get stuck, stare at the wall, and then find my way out of there. So I feel like I've made an effort and I deserve, quote unquote, right, deserve a certain amount of viewership, so to speak. And then you'll check out these numbers. Sometimes they're not particularly, things take time in life, understood. But it's not sometimes very inspiring or encouraging, because I'm like, oh my God, I spent like 6 hours to create that, and it's not getting the reach that it needs, right? Not that it deters me from doing anything in life in general, but I just want to share it because you mentioned the quality of content. I stumbled into something recently. Now, again, I'm not judging that person's content because we live in a very politically correct world, but he had actually taken a camera, I believe, to Costco, right? And again, I don't shop at Costco. I know two kinds of people who shop at Costco. One who absolutely love Costco, and the other kind who want to have nothing to do with it because you buy more than what you ever need in life, right? I belong to the second group of people, so nothing. It's a great store, just not for me. So this person goes to Costco, and Costco started selling a lot of Indian groceries, I believe, recently, right? Just because there's a fair number of Indian population has grown in the US and stuff. So they go to Costco and they pick up every Indian item. They walk through the aisles, right? And then they pick up rice, certain kind of basmati rice or lentils, and then they show that to the camera and then call out for the price of that item, right? This is the video, right? So there's a 30-minute video of somebody actually going to a Costco and picking each of this and showing the price, and then they put it back where it belongs, and then they go to the next item that's related to anything that's Indian, and then they take it. I was like, wow, I would have never thought I could never do that kind of content, even if somebody asked me or paid me to do it. Because I was like, you could go to Costco.com and I can figure this out. I don't know why I need to watch a 30-minute video to tell. I can go to Costco.com and search for what I'm looking for. I just filter by, I don't know, Indian stuff and whatnot, right? But that's not the that's not the part that bothered me. It's their camera, their time. I think the video got like 4 million views like within like a day or so. And I'm lost. I'm like, oh my god, should I have not? I did a video, I don't know, not too long ago about one of the AWS AI products. I think just skimming the surface of that, and I'm trying to get deeper into it. It was not, it was fun, but it was not very pleasurable to go through something you have no idea, and you're recording it as you're doing it, and you're like, oh my god, Krish has to be the biggest idiot on earth, right? That it takes that effort and the mental muscle and stamina to do it. You're not getting 3 million views for that video. I promise you that, right?
Yeah.
So the content quality is just, even if it's a digression, it just resonated with me when you just said that. I was like, you know what? You couldn't be preaching more to the core. I literally feel that on a daily basis as I change and try to have these conversations, just live and learn essentially, right? But going sort of back to some of the things you were saying there, I jotted it down here. The first thing I mentioned was companies wanting to make money and growing, right? Which is very understandable. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Nvidia, right? People who are in the business or not even in the business could not have not heard about it. They the last year, I forget the numbers, but in the last 12 months, Jason, give or take again, right? At least in the last 6 months, their stock price hasn't changed much, if any, right? It's been pretty stagnant. In the 6 months prior to that, they had grown remarkably well. In other words, every quarter they were reporting like, I don't know, like $80 billion or some big number, right? The growth was in the hundreds of percentages, right? Compared to the previous quarter and the previous year. But then, it's a size, as they grow in size, it's impossible to keep up those numbers. It's understandable because they are not a $300 million company, right? Not a $3 billion company or a $30 billion company. They're like a $3 trillion company. So the numbers are going to sort of subside and stabilize. But that apart, if you kept an eye on the stock market, it's you could tell, right? I mean, the last week has been horrible, but even otherwise, there's this sentiment around, hey, our company's spending too much money on AI. Like, the big four like Microsoft and Meta and Google and Amazon, their CapEx spend has continued to increase in the last year or two. And I think Sundar Pichai said in one of the last previous earnings calls that they would rather run the risk of overspending on AI than underspending on AI, right?
Yes.
When investors, people ask that question. But there is this fear that, hey, you know what? NVIDIA is dependent on these 4 or 5 large companies and customers. Do they need to keep replacing these GPUs every quarter? What's going to happen there, right? So I want to talk about that because you mentioned companies and them, wanting to show profits and wanting to grow in that sense. But would they be spending, like, would Meta be spending so much money? Let alone the fact that I think I saw a Zuckerberg video where he said he's expecting a lot of the mid-level engineers to be completely replaced by AI as well. Would companies be spending, two-part question, which is, one is, if this is not going to be as true as people are making it out to be, these large multi-trillion-dollar organizations, right? The largest companies, not just in America, right? In the world, these are the largest companies in the world. Would they be willing to spend this kind of money, right? That's my first question. The second part of the question is, maybe they are able to spend it because they have the mental acumen or the resources or the people that are able to leverage what's happening, in terms of the advancements at the pace that it's advancing. But that's not possible for everybody else to do it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
What I'm trying to say is the smartest minds probably get into some of these companies and maybe they understand this quicker than some other people. It's like quantum mechanics, right? Not everybody understands quantum mechanics. Like I saw a video of a professor who said, nobody understands quantum mechanics, so welcome to the class. 6 months later, you'll be joining me in not understanding the same course. It was like a funny thing that he said, right? So what I'm trying to ask is a two-part question, just repeat it, is one is, would companies spend this much money if there wasn't that much of a guarantee? And two, are they able to spend the money because they know how to put that to use better than the rest of the world, which may or may not be equipped, maybe intellectually, maybe from a resource standpoint, maybe from any other perspective you look at, to be able to put everything that's available to use to the extent that they are able to use. What are your thoughts on both those items?
I think if you go back and you look at like the initial buzz around when OpenAI released ChatGPT, um, I think that that was a shock to the system that caused people to really look at it from the perspective of well, let me I think a lot of what is going on, especially when you talk about the big companies, one, they have the money to invest in this, and two, that there is a fear of missing out on this market because in 2020, was it 2020? Well, whenever ChatGPT was released, that that was the new frontier, and what really is the people who win that game will be will be a very rich. They'll be a very large company, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to replace all the people. Doesn't mean it's going to replace all developers. And it's kind of like the whole thing with the browser, not the browser wars, but the search engine wars in the 90s and early aughts, and that Google's domination of search led to their domination in terms of content, in terms of ad revenue, and every other part of their business. If you took away search from Google, the company would collapse. And so that's really what I think this is, or at least initially was, that this could be huge. There's no guarantee that it will be, but this could be huge. This could be that next real major shift in technology, and we want to be in that game from early on because we can afford to dump hundreds of billions of dollars into this, as opposed to we don't think it's going to be much, and then it becomes really big, and then they're lost. They've likely, I mean, if Microsoft hadn't made the investments into this, and it did turn out to be really, really impactful, we'll say the same type of shift that search was on the web, and everything that Google built based off that, Microsoft would go out of business. I mean, so this is, and I think you're going to see every other major technology shift, regardless of how accurate their predictions are. You're going to have companies that kind of go and flood that until the investment starts petering out, or until the return on the investment start declining.
I think those are important points, right? So to your point, you're basically, just rephrase what you're saying. You're saying is along the lines of what Sundar Pichai said, which is the risk of underinvesting is quite high. If it became big, they don't want to be missing out on this, right? Fear of missing out essentially, and they can afford to not miss out, so it makes sense. So the second part of my question, Jason, was, are those companies, the way they hire, the type of people they're hiring and staffing and whatnot and training, is there a difference between, hey, they are equipped to be able to use these tools better? So it's one thing to have a tool, but it's entirely another to be able to use that tool to the best of what the tool offers itself, right? So what are your thoughts on, hey, somebody at Meta or Google or Amazon or Apple? Apple's not been spending much here, so I'll just take them out of the picture for now. But say the other ones, right? Meta, Microsoft, and Google and whatnot. People working there, are they able to, are they in a position to use these tools better than other people? So when we read this news and digest it, we have to be like, you know what? I work there, so it means the same statement means something else to me. Or I hear the other side is I don't work there, so even if those tools are available, I probably am not in a position to make the best use of those tools. Do you see a separation there?
I Possibly. I mean, I do know that the big tech companies do a lot to try to hire the best of the best. They tend to pay more, especially from a developer perspective, but also a lot of their other, like the machine learning engineers, their back end people, and everything else. From a technology perspective, they try to hire the best of the best. One, they can afford to, and two, it is a tactical advantage to them to have the smartest and the best people compared to other people or other companies. So yes, I do think that, and maybe we could take this to a slightly simpler example, that you give a skilled craftsman, or a framer, so somebody that can go in and they can frame a house, you give them a hammer, they're going to make better use of it than if you give it to a chimpanzee. I mean,
Right.
or somebody that's never, or even just a person that's never actually gone and framed a wall before. They're not going to be. They'll have the exact same tools, but they're not going to have the same output. The outcomes are going to be very different. It's going to take the people that have never held a hammer before much longer to frame a 2x4 wall than somebody that does that for a living and they're one at the top in the fields at framing a house. So I, I I think the answer is yes, but what it comes down to is that I think it's one, your skills, your intelligence, how long you've been doing that, your ability to adapt to new tools, new technologies. Again, it doesn't matter if it's AI or if it's a framing hammer. But by and large, the best brain power, we will say, that the large tech companies they fight over those individuals.
Okay, which means if somebody's part of an organization that does not necessarily compare in those, if you took them as metrics, compared to the same level of Meta or one of these other companies we spoke of, the chances of somebody being replaced by AI, is it not directly contingent on the ability of the organization as such? Meaning, if I'm working in a place that's pretty cool and extraordinarily smart and filled with great minds, I run the risk of being replaced by AI a bit sooner than if I were working in a place where people are not that brilliant. I mean, is that a fair thing to say?
I don't know. I think really I don't have an answer to that question. I haven't really thought too much about something like that, but I do think that what we will see is fewer engineers potentially being required to do we'll say the drudge work. Like, oh, we need a single page React app. There's only so many ways that you can build that. I mean, and there's established patterns that ChatGPT and the models can get mostly right most of the time. And it's very much akin to that if you look at it from the perspective of if we're punching cards to feed into a machine to do our programming, or you take the next step to where you're writing assembly, and then you add, and oh well, now we're going to C, now we're going to Python and Ruby, or some of these higher level languages. You become more productive, and so you can produce more output with fewer people. And like the introduction of LSPs into development environments, that now I can start typing, and it will help me fill out my method description or my if statements and my switch statements and all those types of things, and I'm kind of filling in the blanks. That I think that you'll see people becoming more productive in kind of those regards, and so might need to hire less people. Or you might get rid of people, like if you're an Amazon or a Meta or some of these other companies that have tens of thousands of engineers, you might be able to replace a lot of them if you're talking about we're replacing the work that is really repetitive. You could almost just copy and paste it from one project to another and achieve the same outcome. So I do think that I do think that there will be we'll say, the same company can do the same work with fewer people, but I don't know what those percentages are. And I'm not even going to take a guess.
No, I do have some of those things that you mentioned, right? Let me add them to the mix. You mentioned repetitive actions, which I think is something I jotted down as well. From what I have seen, if you're doing something repeatedly, right? As a developer, if you're doing something one time, you don't try to automate it generally, right? When you're doing it twice, you start thinking about it. And if you're doing it the third time, if you didn't automate it, then maybe you should not be in engineering, right? Doing something else, to be honest, right? But that's not true. I've seen people, and sometimes do the same thing 50 times, and I'm like, why would you not find a way to do this quicker? Now, again, it's not a question of AI in this example here. It's a question of the engineer themselves. Some people are going to find ways to doing things better all the time, and there are others who may not do that, right? Who may actually believe that I've done it a certain way and it's worked for me, and I'm going to continue doing that. Just because I've done a certain thing a certain way in the past, and it's worked, it doesn't mean I should change it, right? You know what I mean? Not everybody belongs to that school of thought. You're like, what, just because I've done it a certain way, it means nothing, right? I still want to do it the way it makes most sense in the current context. But AI and a lot of these tools actually make that part of the life a whole lot easier, right? Anything that you're doing repetitively, right, that you would have actually try to write scripts for, or maybe even done something to make it more automated, perhaps you have to do lesser, right, to benefit from it, right? Makes
Yep.
complete sense. If there's a design pattern, you can leverage this.
Well, and I use a variety of different models all the time for those types of things for that I'm working for myself. And it's not, and I want to separate I'm learning something, and I will turn off any LSP or the code generation type of stuff if I'm learning something. If I'm learning a new language, because you end up developing a little bit of laziness and dependency on those things, and you don't actually learn the control structures within the language. And so once I've kind of got, okay, I know this a little bit, and I'm just looking at increasing my productivity, then I'll turn those types of things on, so that way I'm able to get through those things, because it's generating out the method signature and all that, and I'm not having to think through that, because I'm not thinking about how to construct a method. I'm thinking through the algorithm or what that method is actually going to do. And the same type of thing that you have with Copilot and some of these other code generation tools, I can see a little bit of value into that. But I want to kind of pivot a bit before diving into that piece of it. One of the main things that I use a lot of code generation for are things that I just don't want to write. I mean, and it's a lot of more personal things that, like the other day, I wanted a Python script to go through and do a whole bunch of do some stuff on media management. I have a bunch of separate MP4 files. I want to combine them into a singular file with where each one of the individual files was a chapter marker inside that final output video. Like, it wasn't important to me to go through, and even though I know I could do it by hand, it wasn't important to me, because really I wanted to get that task done, as opposed to spending an hour or two kind of going through and writing it and remembering all the different constructs of FFmpeg and all the parameters and all that type of stuff, because I don't do that on a regular basis. And so I just had ChatGPT create me the script, but it still didn't work. I mean, it wasn't like I was asking for something really complex. It was, here's a list of the files, here's the folder structure that they're in, create a singular output where each of the individual files was a chapter marker, and it didn't work. And I could go through and when I encounter those types of things, I want to go, even though I can see where the problem is, I want to see what it takes for the damn thing to figure it out. And it never did, even though I was kind of hinting at, well, what about this and what about that? And so I eventually just kind of went in and made the changes myself, because I was growing impatient with it, and just kind of get it done. Another example, just yesterday, I wanted a Docker Compose file that would take that had two separate containers, one for a ExpressVPN and one for a proxy server that would be exposed to the host computer, so that way I could route traffic through that and through the VPN. And I went through several different models with this. I have a version of DeepSeek that's running locally. I have other models that I'm running locally, and I went to a whole bunch of different ones once I started seeing this pattern, where it gave me an example that just didn't work. That in order to get this stuff, in order to really do what I wanted to do, you had to have the networking configuration set up in a different way. But then it gave me, and it was set up that way, but then it exposed ports on some of these on the proxy container, which Docker doesn't allow you to do. I mean, because you're violating the principle of the network that you're trying to create. And so I said, well, this doesn't work. And I knew what was next. And then it rewrote everything. But then what it did was it created a separate network where you could expose the ports, but then the traffic wasn't solely routing through the VPN. And then, well, this doesn't work. And again, I knew what needed to be changed, but then it was, well, let me see what I can do to coax this thing into giving me the right answer. And and what it started doing was it was just going back and forth. Well, okay, this doesn't work, and this is what you wanted to do, and so I'm going to give you the exact previous example that I had already said didn't work. And it went back and forth and back and forth, and then it just started generating nonsense, and it was just like, this is ridiculous. And all the models that I tried had that basic thing of where we're not talking about like replacing a software developer in developing complex systems. All I wanted was just a Docker Compose file, had 2 containers, and it was just the traffic had to route in a very particular way, and it couldn't do it. None of them could do it right. Now, maybe that's on me. Maybe I'm not maybe I won't make a great prompt engineer, which is where they say we're going. But again, when you're looking at just trying to get it to do something that hasn't already been done, we'll say, that hasn't been done, that it maps into the statistical probabilities of these generation algorithms, that it really has problems with that type of stuff.
Jason, you said a number of things, and I've noted them down here. All of them are interesting, so we're going to patiently go through them. Before we do that, let me tell you, you mentioned one of the last things you said. I had done a podcast recently, something that you may want to check out, or other people watching here as well. I took a piece of code. I don't remember whether it was Ruby code or Golang or one of the languages we use in our Snowpal ecosystem. I took that code and ran it through these 4 tools, right? ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Gemini, and Copilot, right? The 4 big players, as I understand it, on the market. I said, you know what? Analyze this code, improve it, and tell me how it could be better, right? It was the same question. And you mentioned prompt engineering. I'm not, I'm new to that as well, but I just asked, ceteris paribus conditions, right? Because it's Krish asking the same question in the exact same manner and using the exact same snippet of code across all those 4 tools. I just want to see how each of them perform. And it was very interesting. You can check it out if you get some time there. I actually ran through the code and discussed through those items. I won't go into the details of it because I honestly don't remember all of it, but I was quite surprised, right? Quite surprised. 2 reasons. One is I was expecting it to be quite perfect. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I went there believing, you know what? I wrote this code, right? At some point of time. I'm sure the tool can do a way better job. I mean, I was not even doubtful about it, right? I was like pretty certain about it because I'm human and the tool is not, right? So therein lies a difference already. And plus, when I wrote the code, I remember we had to get that done in a half a day's time. So I remember vividly that it was not like we didn't go through a rigorous review process. It was not rewritten more than once. It worked. It did the job. And we're like, you know what? This is good. We'll ship it. So it was a prime candidate for problems, if you will, right? That things could be done better. I ran it through those 4 tools. And then at the end of that, I was like, you know what? Maybe my job is going away. I'm not denying that, but not right now, right? That's the conclusion. And I went there with the prejudice. I went there believing that it's going to do a phenomenally better job.
Yep.
Maybe I set the bar a little bit higher. So I couldn't agree more with a number of things you said there, right? I just want to take this as an example to say, you know what? Even when you go with an open mind and want to believe that you are going, your whole purpose is going to be questioned, right? There's going to be an existential crisis of some sort. It was not convincing. Now, the answer, to play the devil's advocate, Jason, people are going to say, oh, you know what? This is 2025. You're 1 year into the making, maybe 2 years into the making. How is it going to be 10 years into the making, right? Which is fine, right? Which is acceptable. But, you can buy a product for what it promises, for what it delivers today, right? Not for what it promises to deliver, right? You know what I mean? So you can I'm paying something for this car because this is what it's actually doing today, right? I mean, I test drove the Tesla and I was less than impressed with the FSD. Maybe it'll get better, right? I'm sure it'll get better with all the data, but I cannot pay that. I mean, I cannot trust FSD and sit there doing nothing because it's going to get better. I can only go with what it actually does today and whether I'm convinced that it is doing its job or not, right?
Yep.
So in that sense, these things will improve. The models will improve. but maybe some other things might change in the world too, right? So I can, who can speak for just the LLMs improving and you becoming obsolete, right? Just want to add to sort of what you mentioned there. I want to go through a couple other things you said. Anything you want to add to? Do you agree,
Well, I,
disagree?
I agree, but I'm also skeptical on the rate of the improvements, especially if you look at the models that have come out in the last couple of years that um, they've been good and they've been better, but not the same rate of change of, we'll say, from 0 to 1 was a much bigger change than from 4 to 5, like ChatGPT. Um, and really what that's going to come down to is training data, which they've already consumed all of the data that has ever been created. So that's gotten us to here. But the issue that you're going to run into is the more people use these to create things, to create content, create videos, create all this stuff, is I see it like the Xerox effect. And so where you make a copy, it usually looks okay. You start making copies of copies of copies of copies. And then by the time you do that 10, 20 times, the quality is not going to be as good. Prime example of this that I was listening to an older song from Killswitch Engage, and I was like, "What? I wonder what this song means." And so I did a quick search on that, and the first one, the top one from Google, I went into that, kind of read through the article on it, and I started, this doesn't feel right. Like there's something off here. And then it got to towards the end where it mentioned that it mentioned that in terms of like the relationship of, or that what the song meant to the singer songwriter, and his name was Jesse Leach. Well, the problem with that, and they went through and they talked about the whole thing, and they made numerous references to the singer Jesse Leach. The problem with that is that he wasn't the singer on those albums. and it was that he was the original singer for the band, and then he went away. Then there was another guy that came in and sang, and he was on him for 3 albums, and then Jesse Leach came back. Well, again, he wasn't the singer during that time period. He didn't write those songs. So it had nothing to do with what his outlook on life was and all that type of stuff. And then at that point, I'm like, okay, either this author is stupid or this was just generated by AI. And that she really has no understanding of this band, and she shouldn't be writing anything about the meaning of these songs. If you can't even, if it's one thing to just simply mistake or misspeak and say, oh, I really meant that. But when you've got references to that person 3, 4, 5 times in that article, then yeah, you either don't know the band or you just use ChatGPT to do this. And so you start to see a lot of this content that is getting created by AI is garbage or is half accurate, half right. And that's going to start flooding or start, we'll say, poisoning the training data for the next versions of the AIs. And so they're going to be, if they can't solve that problem, which I know that they're trying to by generating content and all that type of stuff. But again, if your generated data is garbage, your output is going to be garbage. And so I think we're gonna start seeing a lot more and more of that, of the unreliability of the outputs of some of these things before we get to a point of where we've got AGI and Terminator and all that crap.
Which goes back to what you said earlier, which is things that have not existed yet, which is, I think, a great point, right?
Yeah.
In other words, you read that AI can be creative, but it's kind of weird to me because a lot of this depends on whether it depends on large language models or small language models or whatever else it depends upon. It depends on existing data to come to conclusions, to create videos and text and whatnot, right? All of that is driven by existing data, right? So there is a premise. But the argument is it can also be creative because, with Apple's release of, I don't know how many people use it. I used it for 2 days and I haven't seen it since, which is, the app that they launched. I can't remember the name where, oh my God, I forget the name, with one of their recent releases, Jason, where you upload your photo and you can add a couple of words and it's going to create this image whatever the Apple's term for that is, right? To create it. So it's supposed to be creative, right? It takes you and it puts whatever else you say and tries to come up with something creative. But I don't know if the word creative even makes sense. I'm confused because to me, creative, at least as I've understood it all along, as a lot of us have, is what does not exist and has now come into existence because that person, which happens to be, a Homo sapien, right? A human who actually did something and created it. But now, if a machine uses data that's already there to create something, I don't know if it's creative. Does it make sense? That's kind of what you were saying with things that have not existed yet, right? With creative items, like where do you see, like you mentioned, singing and songwriting? I'm just curious. The fear that was in that's in Hollywood or someplace else. Can a machine actually be creative now or in future to the point where on the side where you're receiving it, you perceive that to be actually creative and not sort of generated, if that makes sense?
I this is where some of my biases might start showing. Um, I think if what you're talking about is just work that is derivative and it's just a copy of a copy of a copy, which you see a lot, especially in Hollywood, pop music is a prime example of you can if you remove the singer, so their distinctive voice, it's unlikely you would be able to tell the difference between one pop song to another pop song. I mean, because there's an exact formula to create a popular song in the pop genre, and it's like here's the song length, here's the beats per minute, here's the general melody flow, here's the song structure. So you have intro, verse, bridge, chorus, those types of things, and just repeat that pattern over and over again. That's why you have all these generated bands that are that they weren't organic, like Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and I can't even think. It's been a long time since I've even paid attention to that genre, so I can't even think of some of the more. But all those were just created by the corporation. They were by the record studio that was looking to create a band to generate money. If you take music that is more of like the stuff I listen to, technical death metal and symphonic death metal and some of the more extreme forms of metal where there is no structure to it. I mean, there is a song structure to it, but it's not the stamp, repeat, and then just put it out again. There's a lot of creativity into more into a broader base of the music that unfortunately not a lot of people listen to. I mean, there's a reason why pop music is popular, is because it follows an established pattern, and there's a reason why progressive bands like Dream Theater, Rush, and I'm escaping another genre of music I listen to, but I'm escaping it. They're not as popular because that type of music, not everybody can listen to it because it is it's disjointed time signatures. It's a lot of variation to it, tend to be much longer songs and those types of things. But there's a reason why some of the popular music is popular. A lot of people kind of gravitate towards that type of stuff because it follows a predictable pattern. And you're going to see that exact same thing within television, within books and content and all those types of things. That ChatGPT will be awesome at replacing the people that all you are is you're part of a pre-existing algorithm that was just created by a human that was stamp, repeat. And like if you, I know I'm rambling, but if you take a look at most sitcoms, they're almost the exact same thing. You could it's the exact same storylines. There's a little bit of difference in terms of the specifics on it, but you can go back 50 years and a lot of the sitcoms follow the exact same pattern, and they're popular because they follow that pattern. The shows that don't follow those patterns tend to not be as popular, or they're really, really popular to a niche of people. and they don't tend to do well commercially, but they tend to develop these rabid cult followings like Firefly. But shows like How I Met Your Mother, some of the other ones, I don't watch a lot of that type of stuff, but they follow a pattern. They just have a slightly different tweak to the story.
So in other words, Jason, the crux of it is, are you then saying when it comes to creative items such as that, right? AI is not necessarily going to replace the 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 core of creativity from a music or a cinema standpoint.
I so here's the thing is I think that it will assist. I think it will replace the stamp repeat types of content, whether that be books, music, movies, TV shows, those types of things. I think it's going to be harder to completely take AI and create something that falls outside of those patterns. Unless what you're doing is, hey, create me a video that is exactly like Memento, or create me a movie, or I'm sorry, a TV show that
But
is.
let me interrupt you there, right?
Yep.
You took a movie, one of my favorite movies, right? Memento, right? So I was going to take an example of an actor like Julia Louis-Dreyfus, my most favorite actress. So you took Memento, and when you use some of these tools, you're going to say, hey, create a movie or give me a script or write a script that sort of is like Memento, or play the character, pretend like from the system engineer prompt on AI. You're like, pretend that you're Christopher Nolan
Yep.
and create another script that is like Memento. But the problem right there is there is example and judgment already, because I'm telling you to be like somebody else,
Yes.
which defeats the whole purpose, and that's not creative. It ceases to be creative right from the offset there.
Yeah, and that's where and granted, whenever we do something, unless you've been locked in or you've been out in the wilderness and haven't been exposed to anything for years, you're you when you create something, you are taking in all the individual influences that you've had. And so, like from a music perspective, if you're a songwriter and you only listen to one type of music, that's the type of music you're going to create. If you listen to a whole bunch of different genres, you're going to take bits and pieces and merge that into something. And yes, you could probably do the same thing with some of the music generators of, hey, I want something that blends the genre of pop music and technical death metal, and then it sings like this and this and this. You could probably generate something along those lines. I just I don't know that the output is going to be something that is going to be worthwhile.
Exactly, right? No, fair point. Okay, we've gone through 3 items. I've got 5 more, so we can do this as quickly as you want to do it. So the next item is all of the points that you had mentioned, and I added a couple of them, couple to the list as well. You mentioned industrial revolution at the top of the call here, right? Really quick there. When something like that happens, there's a fear of people losing jobs, right? I'm pretty sure when that happened, everyone's like, oh my God, what am I going to be doing now? Am I going to be unemployed? Is everybody else in future going to be unemployed? But that surely didn't turn out to be the case, because the type of jobs that came into existence were jobs that nobody knew at the time. Like,
Yep.
who would have thought of something called an influencer 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
There are dime a dozen influencers, as we talk today. So is one way to look at it, Jason, that, what, maybe the job as we know of them today are gone. Maybe there are going to be new types of jobs which you and I are probably not even thinking about today, right? Is that a fair way to state it and say, what? Maybe the jobs that exist today may or may not exist tomorrow, but that doesn't mean the job is gone from a count standpoint. It just gets replaced by a different job. So it's mostly it's more like you don't have the luxury of just doing the same thing over and over and over again. You're going to have to be adaptive and on the move, is sort of what that means.
Well, so I do think that yes, there is a possibility that we're going to start seeing that there are things that new job classifications that come out in 5-10 years that aren't around today at all. Nobody's thought about them yet. Here's the crux with that: that if you actually have an AI, and let's say true AI, not bullshit LLMs that are just that are fancy text prediction machines, but true artificial general intelligence, where it has reasoning, not the reasoning models that are out there today, but where it mimics human reasoning, human intuition, intelligence, and all those types of things. Any job that is created in 5 years, would be replaced by a true artificial intelligence. And especially if you have that mixed into a variety of forms of robots that can interface with the real world and do those other types of jobs in the same way, that in a true AI is going to be able to learn those skills faster than humans can. And so you're talking about a snowballing effect of anything that gets created is going to be replaced by something that is cheaper to operate.
Exactly. Yep. Fair point. I want to ask you some of the code completion that you just mentioned. Just playing the devil's advocate there, right? When you mentioned code completion, you said you turn those tools off and you're learning because you want to know how actually you do it as a developer. Makes complete sense. But just to play the devil's advocate there, when I came to the country more than half my life ago, Jason, one of the first experiences I had was, when you go at the store, we're calculating taxes. It's like 4.5% sales tax on a certain number. You do the mental math in your mind and then you're ready for it. I recognized that wasn't necessarily the culture, right? Like back in India, it was generally common. You just the way you're taught to do this mental math, right? You're not ever looking for a calculator unless you're doing something extremely complex. You could do 90% of the things that you need to calculate on a daily basis. You never have to pick up a calculator, right? But someone told me this saying, you know what, Krish, that doesn't make any sense. Why do you want to put your brain to use on things that actually can be replaced by something that's a $10 calculator, right? Now, to me, it's not convenient because I have to go take my phone out and plug in the numbers. But to make that argument here with code completion and AI assistance, and I ask this very specifically with a certain role in mind, not developers, right? One of my belief is, as AI makes its presence felt and it becomes more prominent, I don't know if developers in totality will go away or will be replaced. I don't know. But I know that we don't need as many as we probably have had in the past. Meaning, other roles, like somebody who's a product manager, who's a technical product manager who actually did not write code because they were not developers, I believe can now actually become developers and become part of the dev team. Meaning, you did not have to hire a full-time developer to play that role, right? If that's a reasonable thing to say, going back to this code completion, why should I learn data structures and all of these traditional ways of learning computing and computer science? Does it make sense anymore? Because why should I know the fundamentals of computing when I can have a code assist tool sitting right next to me correcting me as I'm typing that line of code? So why should I turn off code completion? Why should I want to do things the way that they were done in the past? Is that not a reasonable example or analogous to the calculator example that I'm trying to give here?
I suppose. I think it's more a matter of, do you see yourself as a craftsman or as a try not to get offensive here, but
somebody who just does the job. It does the job.
Yeah,
not passionate about it. Somebody who does the job.
Somebody who does the job. Yeah. If you're a craftsman, regardless of what it is, you want to know how those things work. You want to, and if you have intellectual curiosity, you want to know how, regardless of your trade, you want to know how things work. So that way, one, if the system is, or if your tools are malfunctioning, you know that they're malfunctioning. And it's the same thing that okay, just take a saw. I'm cutting, and I don't really care how it works. I don't really know anything about it. It's just cutting wood. Well, what happens when the saw blade gets dull? Do you know what that means? Do you know what that looks like? If all you do is you just pull, just cut, you're going to start running into problems to where it's going to take longer for it to work. It's going to take longer for you to cut through a board. Pretty soon you're going to start burning through the wood as opposed to actually cutting it. Or we'll take an extreme example of this. Are you familiar with, it was mid 2000s, I think, where that airline that crashed in the Atlantic?
Was it Ryan
Um,
Airlines or something? Was it
it,
Ryan Airlines?
it was Air France. And so what had happened, I don't remember the details of what caused everything to happen. They were flying through a storm or something along those lines, and they were over the middle of the Atlantic, and it crashed. And what they going back through and listening to the radio and the data that was retrieved from the black box and everything, the pilots didn't know how to react because they had grown accustomed to the plane flying itself. Realistically, I mean, almost every flight that you're in, that the pilot's flying when you take off and the pilot's flying when you touch down. By and large, from there, the plane flies itself on commercial airlines and stuff. And so they didn't know how to react to all the conditions that were going on because they hadn't flown a plane in a very long time. And so those types of things where you become reliant on the automations, granted, that's a very, very extreme example. I mean, the stuff we're talking about, where by and large, we're not talking about killing people or people's lives at stake. But then you do have scenarios of where, like there was a radiation machine or something that was for treating cancer. There was a defect in it, and it ended up exposing people to massive amounts of radiation and killing them from that. Well, granted, that was a human error. There was a defect that was introduced by a human. But if you're reliant on an AI to go through and create everything, and you don't really know what the code is, because you may have started that way, but 10 years into just using Copilot, and you've forgotten everything about writing about what the if statements and the structures and all those types of things, really all you're looking at, well, did it pass my unit tests? And if it did, then I'm good. Well, I'm sure that system for treating cancer, if I'm remembering correctly, I'm sure that passed their testing. But with an
Jason,
AI,
sorry to interrupt, but I love playing the devil's advocate with you for many reasons. One of the reasons is I can say the opposite of what I believe and have you disagree to that quite intentionally so, right? And then what I'm hearing is literally what I would otherwise be saying. But the good thing here is now I didn't say it. You said it, right? So it makes it really cool. So, the last 5 minutes of why you said, I've tried to explain why not using the calculator is better to live life. I've not been able to convince very many people, but you've made a much more convincing point there, right? In other words,
I would say, so actually using that calculator, because that's a prime example. So we've homeschooled all our kids. Two of them have gone off. They actually graduated last year, one in mechanical engineering, one in mathematics. And the other two are wrapping this up. But all their math, never allowed to use a calculator. They had to either write it out by hand or figure it out in their head. And really, it's not necessarily about can I do the work, but it's the mental, we'll say, arithmetic also builds a way of thinking that allows you to approach those types of problems, that you could start seeing patterns and you could see easy way to calculate it through your head. And it also prepped them that because when you get into higher language or higher mathematics, you can't use calculators. You're not allowed to use calculators in calculus, at least at our university. And so they didn't have to unlearn that reliance on it when they started going to Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, differential equations, and all those types of things. Now, granted, those are very specific because they had to take a lot of mathematics in mechanical engineering and a bachelor's in mathematics, but they didn't have to unlearn that type of stuff. As opposed to other people in their classes, they were struggling because they couldn't do things without a calculator.
Yeah, no, you should send your boys to India. They'll fit right in. They'll fit right in there, I tell you. Okay. It's funny because the point that you mentioned was actually a point that I jotted down, which was like, not using your intellect. So I want to get your thoughts on it, right? So now one of the things I have a problem with is when you're doing something, right? Now, I did a podcast on this, I think some time ago, where I said, whether every time you go write something, build some new feature, implement something new or an API, if I find myself doing it the exact same way I did it like 6 months ago, Jason. It sort of worries me because I'm like, you know what? Things are always changing. I mean, whether AI or other outside of it, things constantly evolve in software engineering, right? There might be other fields where things don't change just as much, but we don't have that luxury for a good, and it's nice that we don't have the luxury. Things change all the time. So it makes me uncomfortable if I go back to solving the same type of problem in the same fashion, and I'm like, you know what, no, that doesn't feel right because things are changing. Maybe I should be doing this differently, possibly so. And then
Yep.
I would rather learn, you know, to the contrary, which is no, things haven't changed all that much, it's all right, you can do it the way you did that in the past, right? That gives me more comfort than leaning in the other direction. So that, with that as a premise, I feel like when you rely on this external system with AI and these tools and whatnot, right? All kinds of tools. One part of me is like, Krish, you better use the tool so you can become better, become more efficient. You can do things faster. But then there's another other part of me that constantly sort of reminds me that, you know what? By doing that, I'm actually forcing myself to not using the intellect, whether it's a lot of intellect or less. That's, I have to live with whatever intellect, we all have to live with what God's given us, right? But I'm just saying
Yep.
that you're not even able to put that intellect to use. And now you wonder, you're like, you know what, you've suddenly become more stupid than you really are. Now you're like, you know what, I could be doing this. It takes me not much longer to write the 10 lines of code. But now I'm lazy and I'm not wanting to write it because I expect the tool to write it for me. And then the tool does not do a good job, like you mentioned, or doesn't even do the job at all. And now I'm trying to correct the poor job that the tool did instead of doing the job myself in the first place, right? Is that not a sort of a conundrum that a lot of us are going to constantly run into?
I I think I think it is. I think that, I mean, a prime example of this, of relying on tools, that's Anchorage is not that big. I mean, 300 and something thousand people in the main metro area, and I know people that have been here for a while, and they don't know where to go without maps. I mean, it's not a huge city. And by and large, I mean, there are some areas that are kind of older, and you've got some non-straight roads, but a lot of Anchorage is set up into a grid pattern, because it's a relatively new city compared to a lot of the other cities in lower 48, and especially compared to the cities in Europe. And so all it takes is just, okay, you have a general idea of where some things are, and then you can find your way around Anchorage without a problem. If first time you're there, okay, you're going to have some issues because you don't know the landmarks and stuff. But again, if you've been here for more than a year, you shouldn't have to use Apple or Google Maps in order to go to work. And that's the thing, of that you have people that are so reliant on Apple Maps. I don't have to think about it. It just tells me where to go. Okay, well, that's fine, but like, don't be stupid.
What if it stops working? What if that doesn't pick up the connection sometimes, right? It's literally, it
Yeah,
can
it
be
drops a
scary.
connection, or it gives you the wrong information. I've seen that where I just put in, because I wanted to know roughly how long it would take me to get there. I didn't actually use it to drive, like driving to the airport. Okay, is there anything that's gonna and granted, like, there's from here to the airport, there's only one way you can go. I mean, until you get to Anchorage, like there's not another highway. And so are there any accidents? Are there any red zones that I have to be worried about? How far? How, what's the time if I left now I would get there? Sometimes it's given me, like, all of a sudden Apple Maps wanted me to go into a completely different direction without there being any, like, it wasn't trying to detour around something, and it thought it was faster for some reason. I'm like, I know that's not faster. And so,
so I think something to be wary of, right? In other words, if you find yourself not using your intellect because you now have forced yourself to actually relying on these tools, maybe it's not a great thing, right? The tool has to assist you in becoming better, but that does not mean that you do the opposite, which is you stop doing whatever it is that you actually know how to do, and now you start depending on the tool.
yeah. Now, I, I guess we'll maybe kind of shift a little bit in terms of a little bit of optimism around these tools. Is that what what I do think they offer are, we'll say, like startups or small companies, that you can bootstrap potentially a a SaaS type product or some type of software product with fewer people. And so you're not talking about the Metas or the Amazons and how many people they're going to lay off, but hey, I can start my company and put a product out into the world with 3 people, as opposed to 10 years ago, I might have needed 50 people. And so, but what that means is that there is a potential future of where you have tens of thousands of we'll say small companies that are able to make, we'll say, a decent living, maybe not become billionaires, but you can develop a product with a handful of people and not have to grow to a massive organization in order to be successful. But that is going to require more and more people to take that risk. And at some point, what it could be is because all the major companies are downsizing because they don't need as many people, then your risk reward calculations are going to change, because I can't even get a job at a company that is going to offer some mild form of security, which is never secure. And that, well, my only option is to create my own thing. And I do think that there is a future where that is possible. But again, if you actually get to a point of where you're talking pure, true artificial intelligence that is capable of learning, of taking everything that we can do, and they can do it 100,000, or 100 or 1,000 times, 10,000 times faster, you're never going to get in front of that snowball. So,
what you said there, Jason, is remarkably important, right? I want to stress on that. You said it beautifully as well, which is, you need fewer people to getting things done, which means there is room for more people to become entrepreneurs. And I can share a personal example. When we publish our APIs to the marketplace on AWS and other places, we have 8 APIs and 1,400 endpoints at the time of this recording, right? And I can tell you, I promise you that every time we've started to go build one, when we've reached out to people to help us build or whatnot, right? There's been a lot of skepticism. Oh my God, you guys, there's not enough of you to be able to build what you want to be able to build, right?
yeah.
And every single time we've been able to, we're not out there to prove anybody wrong, but we've actually been able to prove them wrong, because we do have 8 APIs out there in production as we speak. That's because, I tell people, you can only judge the quality of what somebody can do, not by the size of their teams. That doesn't make any sense, right? It's just by the quality of the people that are there. Because one of my first jobs at Oracle, I worked with a company out of Netherlands. I mean, I didn't work for them, but they worked with our team here. Four people came from Netherlands. It was amazing. One of my earliest sources of inspiration, telling me that I can build a company as well. They had a company there. We needed a JavaScript layer on top of what Oracle was doing at the time, I vaguely recall. And they didn't have the time or the skills or the money to do it. So they were willing to work with this real small 4-people company, right? They came here. I worked with them closely, and they built this JavaScript layer. This was 20 years ago, right? Before, now we have 1 million JavaScript developers, right? There weren't 1 million at the time, right? There were very few of them. And that told me that, it takes good people to create good stuff. Doesn't have to be the number of people. And now the only thing I want to add to that, Jason, is with AI in the mix, it's a lot more inspiring, because now we can have even smaller teams and get even more done, right? Now there is no more excuse to saying, I don't have all the VC money that dries up all the time. I'm not looking for funding. Nope. If you have the mindset and the mentality and the commitment and the passion, you can still get stuff. And so I couldn't agree more with your point there with the fewer number of people, right? So We've covered a bunch of, sorry, is there something you want to add there?
No, I was just agreeing with you.
And I had a couple of other things before we wrap this up. So I have a last item there, which might be interesting, but I want to talk geography as well, right? Which means the impact of AI as you see it by where you're located. Now, again, I'm not talking about more states in the US, you know what I mean? You live in Alaska, I live in Virginia, but as countries, right? As America, where a lot of this innovation is happening. China is another place where a lot of this innovation is happening as well. And, a fair bit in other countries. Is the impact that it's going to have. Do you see that being different, sizably different, seismically different, or marginally different between the actual impact of AI on economies and people, depending on where they are actually located? And because the reason I ask is, there are folks who watch this podcast predominantly from the US, but there are people in Europe, and I've seen people in certain countries in Africa watching the podcast as well, and in South Asia too. So I want to just to speak to a larger audience to see, do you feel like there's going to be a different sized impact? If so, what are your thoughts on that?
I think yes. I think the impact is going to be different. So if you have the countries that have large, like the U.S. has a large engineering population in terms of like the workforce, the impact of these types of tools could end up with a lot of lost jobs. Potentially a lot of other companies or a lot of small companies like what we talked about kind of getting formed. But you have more people here in the U.S. and parts of Europe and in China that are capable of doing that work because that's what we've done. What you have in areas Southeast Asia, Africa, some of the developing countries in South America and other places that you can have one smart person that really wants to build something, but they don't have we'll say the peer network that you would have if you were in the U.S. And some of those people would feel like they had to migrate to the U.S., they had to migrate to Canada or Europe in order to get into that peer group. Maybe not so much today with telecommuting and all that type of stuff, but I think that you'll start seeing more opportunities created inside those, we'll say, the developing countries, because they don't have to have as huge of a developer and engineering pool to pull from. They can create more by themselves or with one or two people than they could have 5-10 years ago. And so you could see the rise of services and technology services in those countries, and could eventually start actually developing out the economies there. That'll have a negative impact to, we'll say, to the developed world, if using traditional language there, U.S., Canada, China, and Europe and such. But the impact is going to be different. It's going to be a net benefit, I think, for those countries, as opposed to, I think it's going to be, for a while, it might be a net negative for the United States and Canada and Europe.
Okay, so a couple of things there, right? One is, I'll take India as an example. A large engineering workforce there.
Yep.
The last time I was there, I remember the guy who drove me to my house, the cab driver, was an engineer just like myself. I went there to grab some food on the street. The person who was making the food was an engineer as well. So it's not like you're not surprised anymore. The question really is like, people are like, okay, what kind of engineering did you do, right? Was it mechanical versus chemical versus this? The reason I bring that up is a large young population. I think the average age in India, as I understand, is like 26 or 27. There are like 700 million people who are under the age of 30, give or take.
Wow.
That's twice the size of the US population, right? People
Yep.
under the age of 30. Now, a lot of people, going to college is a very common thing, right? From what I remember back home. But here's the challenge I can think of. There's going to be more people in the world. The population, it's starting to stagnate and stabilize, I think. But regardless, the world population is like 8 billion. I think it's going to be like 11 billion at some point towards the end of the century. There are some African countries like Nigeria where the population is going to be doubling or tripling, for instance, right? So the population, there's going to be more people in the world. And there's more machines that are coming into the world as Musk is churning out or promising to churn out Optimus. If Tesla stock is anything to go by, they are not working hard enough. I'm just kidding. But there's more machines and more people. This is going to be one of my last questions, but I have two more after this. This is outside my realm. Maybe Jason hit me. I may not be outside your realm. Are there going to be geopolitical? It's funny, I'm even saying this in an engineering conversation with a fellow developer, but I feel like I cannot not ask it. Are there going to be geopolitical implications of this? More people, more machines, less jobs? Is hell going to break loose?
I think it is a possibility. And really what it comes down to is, what is the can we evolve fast enough, not evolutionarily speaking, but just from a job, a career, and those types of things perspective, fast enough to keep ahead of the AIs, Or will we get to a point, like I said, that snowballing effect, if you have a true AI that is in machines and robots and all those types of things? Yeah, I think there is a very non-zero probability of this turning into a catastrophic event for the world. I mean, it doesn't. I don't know. I try not to get too pessimistic on these things, but and there are people who are thinking about this. Eric Weinstein is one that has talked about where if you have, let's say, he's used cab drivers as an example, that where if you have a company that comes in and it's autonomous vehicles, then what you do is that you essentially license from, say, existing cab drivers. And so we'll pay you a license for your route. And so where you don't have to do that anymore, but we'll give you some amount of money, and then the autonomous vehicles are gonna take over and do that. I'm not so sure how I feel about that. I'm a capitalist. I mean true capitalism, laissez-faire, that type of thing. I believe in free markets, but that might have to be what the new world looks like. Is okay. Well, we're going to lay off. Like, we expect artificial intelligence to take 20% of the software engineers, 50% of the engineers that are today. We'll pay them licenses while we transition into the next phase. That obviously can't go on forever, because I'm gonna study mechanical engineering, even though I'm not ever going to do that, because this company is just going to pay me a license to go through and do that. That's not a long-term solution to this problem. It's more of a, while we get through the transition and we see what the other side looks like. There are a couple other thoughts around how to kind of deal with that, which I haven't paid too much attention to, but I don't know. I mean, if we simply follow the Sam Altons and whatever the CEO of NVIDIA and the people from Anthropic and all these companies, if we just simply follow their vision of the world, I think we do end up in a AI dystopia where you've got a permanent underclass of 99% of the world's population, and then you have just a handful of people who actually have who control everything. So
I mean, not that disparity is not bad enough, right? I've done a few podcasts on creating some courses on finance, and was doing some reading the other day, and you might know this already, Jason, which is, I believe 91% of the money in the US stock market comes from 9% of the population, right? 91%, which means the other there's only 9% left for the remaining 91%. When I talk to people, I mean, people are not even investing because people are not sure. So some of these courses that we are creating is basics of how do you invest in the stock market, right? I mean, we're not financial advisors, but just sharing our 2 cents on it, right? And I notice that when there's so much disparity already in, at least supposedly on paper, one of the wealthiest nations in the world, and you take the disparity and you go to different parts of the world, it just gets broader and broader and wider.
yep.
That's just at the advent of AI. One can only imagine if it can become worse, it can be quite bad. The disparity where the haves and the have-nots with AI, and being able to access all of the stuff that we're talking about, right? Which might make sense to a certain segment of the world's population, and it might be like, I have no clue what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and I think it's really going to become that. So I'm not as concerned with the disparity and the amount of money that a few billionaires have compared to what the general population of, say, the United States has. I'm not as concerned about that, because there's always going to be some form of disparity. It's a matter of that, and especially if you look at the history of the United States, we've always had wealthy people who are a small number of the population compared to where everybody else was. But the general standard of living in the United States is significantly better than it was even in the 80s, in the early 90s. And so it's does the standard of living U.S. and other countries of the world, and obviously you can't compare, say, Nigeria to America, but looking at Nigeria itself and saying, is the standard of living in Nigeria generally getting better or is it getting worse? Now, granted, you have if you have a country with an unstable government and you have civil wars and those types of things, that's a different story. But if you have a stable country, politically speaking, and economically speaking, is that over time, does the standard of living get better? Is the pie, so to speak, continuing to grow? If that is, then the disparity in my mind really isn't that big of a deal. It's when the pie gets stagnant or the pie starts to shrink and you have more people trying to take their piece, that's when things really start becoming a problem. And that's where I think that if you end up with the vision of some of these tech bros and gals, that where everything is AI, OpenAI, Microsoft, Meta, they control everything, and then there's nothing else left. I mean, that pie is not going to grow. It's going to be fairly stagnant, and it's going to become much more of a problem.
Right. And, just to add to that, before we go to the last 2 point bullets here, is not all of them are creating, the idea, sometimes the perception is they're all creating remarkably meaningful stuff all the time. Now, I love those companies personally, but that being said, I think, to be honest, they're not all creating remarkably important stuff all the time, because the bread and butter of Meta is the ad revenue that they're generating, right? The
Yep.
ad revenue coming from Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Now, I don't know if humanity would be not better served if Facebook.com, I'm not saying Facebook.com and Instagram.com should just go in the dark or something like that. I'm just saying that we will still survive, right? It's not, sure, the influencers are going to be upset. Some people are monetizing, number of people may not monetize. But otherwise speaking, it's entertainment, for God's sake, right? You know what I mean? It's social media and it's entertainment. But some companies are doing very important things all the time, maybe, right? But I just want to call out, for at least my personal opinion, is sometimes you hear some people say, yep, Zuckerberg is a cool dude who's worth $200 billion. I get it. Very inspiring. Love, I'm sure, remarkable engineer. Absolutely. But the impact and the importance of what they do sometimes could be exaggerated, in my opinion, right? It's not like you need Facebook to breathe and live and eat life. You need Instagram to do that. I'm like, no. I mean, if it's not there, there's TikTok or something else. It's not like you are the only one doing it, right?
Well, you're I'm of the belief
Did I say the wrong thing or the right thing?
Well, I'm of the belief that the world would be much better if every single social media company, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, everything, if they went dark.
There's going to be people standing with the plaque outside your house, TikTok, with say, no, Jason, TikTok should stay.
Nope. You want to talk about the biggest, TikTok is one of the dumbest things that people can get it sucked into.
And you know what? I couldn't agree more with you, right? Because the other day, when you look at Reels, I asked my friend the other day, I was like, hey, when you start watching this, sometimes you think it's 5 minutes and 10 minutes, and then you're watching this for like 30 minutes, sometimes longer than 30 minutes, and you're like, what did I get out of this thing? I'm sitting here and watching this. It's just scary that, it's amazing that somebody thought of this from a product management standpoint. Hats off to them, that people would be sucked into it. But the amount of time that you could actually potentially waste in consuming content and not creating it is just insane. It's absolutely insane. So I tell myself, even if I'm creating a video that's the world's worst video, at least I made an effort to create it with some good intent, at least at the end of the day, right? It's not to say one is bad or one is good, but I'm just saying sometimes you end up consuming so much content, you're like, I want that 30 minutes back because I've become dumber by virtue of spending the 30 minutes on that platform, actually, right? I'm starting to think slower. It has not helped me in any form, way, or shape. I'm not getting my workout. I'm not getting an activity. And it's just, I can get it. And plus, we haven't talked Gen Z yet. Jason, I had one bullet here about Gen Z. But any thoughts on this item before you go to the last two bullets?
No, I think all of it's a complete waste of time. The only I don't I have a Twitter account, but I haven't logged into it in God, I don't know how long. It's been probably 10 years.
Oh, you know what? You haven't missed much because with all the
I know.
free speech, I mean, I posted. I know I sometimes reshare the content that we create and stuff, right? So I just do it, spend a minute there to reshare. Even the 30 seconds I do the reshare, and I actually end up on that page. I've only seen people hating on each other. I don't know. It could be just what content I've, it's on my feed or whatever. I've never, it's hardly ever a time I think of somebody saying, "You're looking nice, you sound good,
Yeah.
you've done a good thing," right? It's almost always one segment of people bitching about the others, and it's vice versa. And I'm like, you know what? I don't have the energy to fight over things that don't matter. Unfortunately, don't even matter to me, right?
Yeah.
It's like, people are fighting with each other for some other billionaire. I'm like, you know what? Musk will
I,
figure it out. Let's not kill each other for that
yeah.
sake.
I mean, the only thing the only thing I'd say in terms of like an algorithm that I partake in is YouTube. But usually it's I'm looking for how to do something. Like right now or over the course of this in about a couple weeks and over the course of a few weeks, we're going to be getting 20 chickens. And so I need to build a coop.
Uh,
So I've been watching YouTube and just getting some inspirations and some thoughts around techniques for doing that, as well as the really kind of learning about, well, okay, it's great you have chicks, but then what? When should you move them outside, and all those types of things. And so um, that's the type, or I need to figure out how to do something on one of the vehicles, or I want to build something, and so I'm kind of getting inspiration. So I go there specifically for looking for stuff, and so that's how I usually consume YouTube. Unfortunately, sometimes I get sucked into the algorithm and I'm not even paying
oh
attention.
yeah,
Then I
we're
fall
all
into
human
that.
at the end.
Uh,
Yeah, we're all
yeah,
human at the end of the day, right?
I mean,
Yeah, I was going to say. Sorry, sir. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, it's and once I see myself doing that, then it's like, okay, I'm out. I'm stepping back, and it's not like I've wasted an hour, or like, oh wait a minute, I'm watching. I'll notice it like a couple minutes in that I clicked on something that wasn't really part of why I was originally, like what I was originally looking for, and it may have been interesting, but that's not why I came here. And so then it would be, okay, nope, it's time to shut it down and do something else because I'm getting
Yeah,
sucked into that.
yeah, I have like 8 channels I've subscribed to. I think on YouTube. Out of them, one of them, it's only 8. Literally, all of 8 is the guy I told you about, Outdoor Boys, who's based out of Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of my favorites. You said you have questions. My son and I joke around. Luke has the answer to every question in the world. You watch his video for like 20 minutes. The amount of learning that you get from that video, it's overwhelming. It's like sitting in a quantum mechanics class, except that it's about some other topic, right? About
Yep.
him surviving out in the wilderness in Alaska and building things. It's just super inspiring, and his whole demeanor and how simple he is as a person. That's the kind of YouTube content. I mean, he's probably one, and if you run through 200 channels or YouTube channels, you'll be lucky to find one like Luke, right? He's just amazing. I'm just a random statement I just mentioned because he lives in Alaska and all of his content is based out of Alaska, pretty
Yep.
much, primarily so at least. Yeah.
Well, and one of the, I mean, to kind of tie that back into the AI is that what I think you're going to start seeing on a lot of this stuff, and you're kind of seeing it with people kind of going through and generating AI content and just publishing it, which is just a bunch of crap. But you get to the point of where YouTube or TikTok itself, we don't care about the creators. We're just going to start creating AI content that, hey, here's an algorithm or here's a topic that we can start feeding people through. And then we're just going to create, especially if you can do it, like if you can do it near real time, then it's just the one after another of a video or something getting created just to keep people there as opposed to actually learning things. And so if it like all the people that you just sit there seeing and flipping through TikTok and just scroll. Same thing on Facebook. Like Facebook generates content using AI, And the more
Right.
that those companies, then they don't have to worry about, well, if we create this content and that's what everybody's watching, I don't have to pay creators.
Yeah, it's and then there'll come a point if they're going to use AI to create content, we're going to have to come up with AI to consume that content, so AI can create and consume the content, so humans are not wasting time consuming AI content, so to
I,
speak, right?
yeah,
You know.
yeah, yeah.
So
It's it.
coming,
Anyways, go. Yeah, go ahead.
so we've come to the last two bullets I have here. One is all of this is remarkable. I want to say before I go to the last bullet, I want to say, I made a joke about the Costco, the creator who went to Costco and was making a video. Now that I think about it, Jason, maybe it's not a bad idea because this conversation, first of all, thanks to you, it's been phenomenal. You know what I mean? It's just it's something I've been wanting to have, and then the topics we've covered here to me is a lot of learning, right? But I cannot say it's like watching reels because even when I'm trying to understand what you're saying and asking something back, I have to digest what you're saying, process it, and try to follow up with that to the extent that I can, right? So it can get tired, you know what I mean? It
Yep.
takes it's like work, right? You're doing, it's like work, it's not like a casual conversation, right? Now that I think about it, I'm like, you know what, Krish, maybe I should just be going to Costco and making those videos because they seem more relaxing to make. I don't have to worry about what should I be asking Jason, or do I understand what Jason's saying so I can ask a fairly meaningful follow-up question to that, right? So maybe that is a good thing. Maybe creating that Costco content is in a funny way.
No,
Uh,
I've been over the last, let's say, 6 months or so. I've really kind of getting into that mindset of doing what is difficult. I would I would really recommend reading David Croggan's first book. Well, actually, both of his books are good. He was Navy SEAL. He does a lot of the long distance running and all that type of stuff. But it really just that shift of you do what's difficult because that makes you a better person. Whether it's going out and going for a run, going out and lifting weights, or going out and making something that is hard, because it at the end of the day, yes, if all you're doing is all you're producing something as you're producing a widget so that you can con somebody into buying the widget, or like, hey, I'm going to create this video that all I'm doing is just going through Costco so that way I can get 4 million views. Okay, great. One, what are you contributing to humanity, and what are you contributing to yourself? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, yes, in the grand scheme of things, each of our lives are very, very minuscule in terms of we'll say the length or the lifespan of the universe itself. So while you're here, do you want to be a taker, a consumer? Do you or where you're generating meaningless stuff, or do you want to do something that at the end of your life you can look back and said, yes, I did something. It may not have made me rich. It may not have made me important. It may not have made me, to have 10 million subscribers on YouTube, but I had a meaningful life. Or do you want to be, yeah, I'm one of the guys in Wall-E where if I fall off my little scooter thing, I can't even get up. I mean, is
Jason, I don't know how it's possible. How do you say things that are I cannot, I don't understand this because you live like, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 miles away, and we didn't grow up together, didn't go to the same school. But there are things that you say that I tell my wife after the last podcast, I was like, it's just insanely weird that Jason says things exactly the way I would actually say it. It doesn't make any sense. The reason I say that is you mentioned astronomy, right? I love that. That's a very favorite topic of mine. I talk about it all the time. I don't know much about it, but the one thing that always I talk about is the light years and how long it takes to go wherever it is that you need to go. So I
yep,
take, I do these examples at home all the time. I tell Meena, I'm like, and Varun, oh, you know what? It's like going to India and coming back is 20,000 miles, right? 20,000 miles. And if you take a light year, if you travel at the speed of light, which is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meters per second, and you pick a random galaxy and one of those tiny stars that's out there, how much time is it going to take us to actually even it's not, you can't go there as humans, but
nope,
just when you look it up, you are in a small planet in one galaxy, right? And you can't even go to the furthest planet in your own galaxy. I mean, if you could go to Mars, great, or if we see some footage of it at least, so there's some idea. we talk about the next galaxy, and then the third one, and then the 10,000th one, and then the 100,000th one, and then the millionth galaxy. And you talk about the size of all these things, and then you figure if you take a morsel of sand, is it morsel? I don't know how you measure sand. Is it
A
a
grain of
single
sand.
grain? Oh my God, I know that. It's not rice, it's not morsel. Sorry. You take a grain of sand, you take a grain. I don't even know what that is, right? You could go to a beach and it's probably less than a grain of sand, right? The existence that we have and the purpose of our existence is it has to be reasonably meaningful while you live and perhaps live for a little while after you're gone. So I think it is beautiful. I think you said it beautifully, because there's no right or wrong answer, but you have to believe at the end of the day that when you're standing in front of God, I'm not a very religious person, not exorbitantly religious, but I would say that, there's a question that's like, hey, did you use all the skills I gave you, right? Whether you
Yeah.
did a great job using those skills or not is a different question altogether. Now, I don't know if I can tell God I wrote the best code every single time, but I at least intended to write the best code. The intent was at least honest, right? So I think it's important for people to recognize it. You have to, it's hard. I mean, I think you have to get to a certain age too, Jason. I don't know, because one of my questions, the last of the two questions was, here's what I'm asking people when I ask myself as well. I see three categories of people, right? At the highest level. One is folks who are nearing their retirement, if you will, right? They've been building software for like 4 decades, maybe even longer, and they're close to calling it a day, maybe. And then they're like, you know what? AI is here. Maybe it's here, lock, stock, and barrel. But I'm going to sit this one out because it doesn't make a meaningful difference to me from a professional standpoint, because I'm just about to retire, right? So I
Yeah.
might be curious about it. I may not be. Perfectly fine. The first category of people in my three categorizations, broadly speaking, are the Gen Z folks, right? People who are entering the workforce at this time. They have not done things any other way before, right? They've not seen the older phones. They don't know how things were in the past. So they can learn everything from ground zero, from scratch, using these tools, understanding the models, using AI. Maybe they like a calculator, maybe they don't, maybe they use code command, maybe they don't, but at least they can make those choices. But they don't have to unlearn anything, because they're just starting to learn and contribute to the workforce, right? That's one category of people. The second, the third category, the one in the middle, the one I'm most interested in for selfish reasons, I say that probably the two of us probably belong in that category, which is we've been building software for a while, and still have some distance to go before we can, was it hang the boots, right? I use these idioms. I love idioms. Sometimes I really, really use them the wrong way. There was a meeting that I was in. I said 5 times that you got to you can. I said that you could build architect this in many different ways, right? This was a meeting in DC with a large number of people from the government as well, and I said I meant to say skin the cat, right?
No.
And please try not to laugh. For the whole 1 hour I was leading the meeting, I got the animal wrong. I said skin the cow, right? And this was, and somebody nudged me after the third time, trying to tell me something, but I just dismissed because I was busy talking. And then at the end of the meeting, someone came up to me and told me, Krish, there's one small thing I wanted to correct. Nothing from a technical standpoint, but when you kept saying skin the cow, I think you actually meant skin the cat. And it was really weirdly funny, because Jason, coming from India, cow is a holy animal, right? It's
Yes.
I'm Hindu as well, so it's kind of very weird in many ways. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought there. Oh my God, I forgot what I was even saying before the story. This is terrible.
Yeah, I
I
don't
don't know
know.
what
I
I
mean,
said.
I got caught up in the hilarity of skinning the cow,
Of skinning
especially.
the skinning the wrong hang oh sorry, the three categories of people, right? I just
Oh
want to get
yes,
your
yes.
thoughts on the third category of people, which is us. We've done things a certain way. We have to continue to do things till we retire. Now we have to unlearn and relearn things, because things are changing, right? uh, how do you see this? Do you see this as three categories? And I mean, I just want to get your 2 cents on the way I'm looking at this.
I think at a high level, yeah, the three categories. I mean, and it doesn't have to be tied to a particular generation, but it's more of how long you've been doing this and where you're at in terms of, are you coming into the workforce? You've been in the workforce for a while, or are you leaving the workforce? Um, I I think for, if you've been in the workforce for a while and you're kind of in the middle of your career, yes, you should, regardless if it's AI or if it's anything else, you should always be looking at what are the technology changes. And so if you're at this point in your career, let's say, and you don't know what AWS is, you probably need to find a new job. um, or you've got such a niche that you don't really have to care about I mean, like, you're a COBOL programmer on a mainframe at a bank. You don't need to know what AWS is. But in general, if you're looking at being more marketable than just that one niche, you do have to keep abreast of the changes and the trends and stuff that's going out there. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert, but you at least have to, at least you should know enough about it to do I want to pursue this more? Do I need to dive into this? Or no, I can kind of put that off to the side and I don't need to learn it. So AI is just another one of those things, but it is going to have a larger impact, I think, in particular in the areas that are stamp repeat, where it is just like, hey, like I used this example before, but I need a single page app written in React. Okay, AI can generate that for you. More than likely, it's going to be 99% correct. There might be some few modifications to it, but you're not talking about, hey, I'm doing systems level programming and I need to do this in assembly and all that type of stuff. So look at where you're at, and is your career actually, and what you've dedicated your life to, React development? I'm sorry, if all you know how to do is develop single page apps in React, you're likely going to be replaced. I mean, AI can do that. It can do it pretty well. And so start learning some additional skills that, like I said before, is there are some things that if it hasn't been created yet, AI doesn't really know what to do with it. If it can't just simply copy an example out of GitHub and give that to you, like you like, that's, and granted, I don't have a specific example, but going back to learning difficult things, one of the things I know, like, I want to get into at least learning Rust because it's a pain in the ass and it's difficult, especially if what you've been doing is Ruby and Python and that type of stuff. It's a completely different mindset. Even though I do have some C experience and some of the strictly typed languages, but learning Clojure or one of the Lisp style languages, doing functional programming, it forces your brain to operate in a different way. And the more that you have exposure to those types of things where you're actually learning it, as opposed to just taking whatever an LLM generates for you and running it, the better off I think you will be. You will have a longer lifespan as a developer, as opposed to, all I know is React and all I know how to do is just run it from, single page applications, and that type of stuff. So that would be kind of where I think, I don't know if you're asking for my advice or not, but like, if you're in that area,
I think that's a great summary, right?
Especially if you're coming into the workforce, the things that are easily repeatable are going to be the first to go away. And what is some of the best skills to have, I would say, is not have the AIs do your debugging. Don't just simply feed a stack trace into an AI and expect it to come out with the output, even though it might be correct. But you having those skills is going to set you apart from everybody else on your team that is dependent on that, and they can't think through a problem. Because if the AI hasn't seen that stack trace before, it's likely not going to be able to give you the right answer.
Right. And then it comes down to being able to differentiate, that you just mentioned, right? If everybody has access to the same set of tools, and if you are presumptuous and make the reasonable assumption that everybody knows to use those tools to a large extent, right? Maybe some more than others, but regardless, if everybody has access to those tools in the world you're living in, and everybody knows how to use those tools, how do you stand apart from everybody else, right? You're going to have to be creative to doing that.
Yep.
And it'll be a weird loop. If to be creative, you end up relying on the tool one more time and go to ChatGPT and find yourself asking, how can I be creative? Because the other two people in the team are going to be asking ChatGPT the exact same question as well. So everyone's going to cease to be creative, and it's going to be a vicious circle, and life is going to end, right? That's terrible, but
Yeah.
I didn't mean it that way. This is amazing. So I have one non-technical question for you, unrelated to the topic. But before that, any questions for me, Jason?
No, actually, I think with the conversation we've kind of gone through and talked about everything that was on my list. So
Perfect, right? My last question to you is, if you were asked to go to a different country and do something different from what you're doing, what would that country be, and what would you be wanting to do?
that's an interesting question. I don't know. I have a lot of varied interests, but I don't know if I would be good enough to actually do that for a living.
No, you don't have to be good enough to do that.
Oh.
I'm not saying for a living, just because you want to do it, because you enjoy doing that in that world, in that part of the world.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, the only like outside of the U.S., I've only been to Europe. I would love to go to other parts of the world. It's more a matter of shuffling, 6 kids, grandbaby, another grandbaby coming, and everything else. And so being able to afford that is another question.
So, Jason, you've not been to Asia?
No, I haven't. I want to go to. I would love to go to Japan. I would love to go to China from a history and a culture perspective. I would love to go to Thailand. I would love to go to Thailand. I would really love to, if I had the funds, just to eat my way around the world, so to speak.
In your list, I'm not hearing one of my favorite countries.
Okay. I mean, I really, I would love to go everywhere.
No, it's not even a surprise. I'm talking about India.
Oh, well, no, I thought about that, but I figured I would just be sucking up to the host. Well, I mean, and yes, India is definitely on that list. Actually, strangely enough, the one country one place I want to go to before I die is Antarctica. And it's just because very few people get to go there, or very few people want to go there, and it's just one of those things of, hey,
you can't be too far from there where you're located. How far is it from you?
Antarctica is on the other side of the globe.
Oh, not the Arctic Circle. Oh my God, the southern hemisphere. Sorry.
Yep. So, I mean, obviously, there's nothing like, it's not like a tourist destination or anything along those lines, but I don't know.
But how would you even? Where would you even like? Would you have to go to like Chile or Brazil, or I mean, where do you travel to go there?
I think well, one, I don't know exactly how you get to go. I mean, I know that there are cruises and stuff that go at least go there. I don't know exactly how to get to where you can, like, say, a tent on one of the on the ice cap. But so yes, that's at some point I need to figure out how can I actually do that. But yeah, like I said, I would love to eat my way around the world. Go to and actually real food, authentic food from all the countries, and but
you know what? I'm going to be watching a video 10 years from now. Somebody is going to be going to a Costco-like place in some other part of the world and talking about it. And I'm like, man, I've seen this guy before. I'm just kidding. I'm just saying it would be you 10 years into the future.
Actually, if it were, I don't know if I'd say my dream job, because I think it would get dull after a while, but their names are Anthony Bourdain, and then I can't remember the other guy, but where they just go and like they'll go to.
Don't tell me it's Andrew Zimmern, the guy from Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Where they go. God, you got to be kidding me! You like those two people?
Well, I mean, from the perspective of just going to a village in the middle of.
I love those two guys. Wow. One more thing in common. I was really upset when Anthony Bourdain died, and I I talk about him like as though I've known him. There's one of the things, now that you mention you like him, I'll tell you, in one of his videos, he mentioned that he found his calling when he was 44. And I tell people, it doesn't matter when you find your calling. All that it matters is that you actually find it, and then you make the best use of it, right? He
Yeah.
found his calling at 44, and he lived to be like 61, right? It's only like 16 years or 17 years of his life that he did what he wanted to do. And
Yep.
who would have done it better? And I always imagine what Anthony Bourdain would have done if YouTube were more popular at the time and he was, doing no
Yeah.
reservations
Yeah.
for CNN and things of that nature, right?
Yep.
It's
But
just,
just going through and like some village in the middle of Vietnam that has that nobody goes to, and actually like what the eating and the foods that actually
Jason,
eat. And,
I'll recommend. It's not related to the podcast. Sorry, apologies to anybody watching. This is just Jason and I chatting for the next 3 minutes before we end it. But this couple of guys I watch on YouTube, I'll recommend it to anybody watching this. There's nothing to do with engineering or AI, but two remarkably creative people, right? Of my list of subscriptions, one is Outer Boys. Hands down, I would recommend, even if you don't live in an icy part of the world, he's a great person to follow. Again, creative. And the next one is Bald and Bankrupt is the name of the channel. He's actually a British guy. His name is Benjamin. Unbelievably humorous, funny, someone who travels the world and unlike any other. The third one is Harald Balder. He's a Norwegian guy. He's just, he's one of my favorites. Been watching him since probably he posted his first video. Fourth one is Itchy Boots. She's a Dutch traveler who's on a bike, single lady who travels the globe. And it's amazing that kind of challenges she runs into as a lady who's traveling all by herself, and how she's able to do that and better than anybody else, right? I mean, these are four people. And then Mark Wiens, last but not least, he's one of the best food YouTubers out there, right? So again, we talked about AI. The reason I even mentioned them is I don't see a world in the near term that AI is going to replace Itchy Boots and Bald and Bankrupt and Harold Balder and all of these people that I mentioned. We're just talking YouTube content, but I'm pretty sure AI is further away from replacing, hopefully, Jason, Crum, and Krish as well, because, sometimes, some people are committed and passionate to what they do, right? I mean, it's just the truth. I'm not saying I'm good, bad, or ugly. I'm just saying that at least the commitment is honest, right? And I've worked with you, Jason. I know you're no different. This is amazing. I was not preparing for a very casual conversation because I knew this was going to be a difficult topic per se. But I think it was, it was great. There's a number of things we touched upon. I don't know if we missed any that I had at the top of my mind. Now, my biggest challenge is I have a couple of other people who also want to talk a similar topic. I have little to contribute. Hopefully, I'm just going to have to piggyback on them just like I did here, because I'd be like, oh my God, there's going to be a different perspective. I was going to talk to a product manager from England. I was going to talk to people in different roles in different countries to see where they are coming from, right? What is their perspective? What do they feel about it? I mean, we are similar in many ways, right? We live in the US and we engineer, so there's only so many differences you can possibly find. And as I found out during the call, there's even fewer differences, good or bad. So I need to go find somebody else who's not even doing engineering completely. So, right? Any closing comments? It doesn't have to be technical, difficult, complex. Anything humorous, funny you want to share with the audience is great.
Well, I think it just like if we want to kind of sum things up in terms of like how do we approach the apocalypse that's coming. That do difficult things, be a producer and not just simply a consumer. Don't just copy paste. Actually learn your trade craft. Don't be a taker is kind of one of the one of the things I could say. This might be politically charged a little bit here, but I would recommend reading Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. They're pretty hefty books compared to a lot of the garbage that most people read today. But just that mindset of do something, be a producer, don't be a taker, and be able to look back on your life and hopefully you live a long life and say, yes, I contributed to humanity instead of just simply taking from it.
You know what, Jason? We must be brothers from different mothers because you mentioned Ayn Rand. I've not read Ayn Rand. My sister has a PhD in English literature
Hmm.
back in India. Her PhD thesis was entirely based on Ayn Rand's books.
Ah,
100%. That's all that she did, right? So even if not me, it's just incredible. She'll
right.
be able to relate to what you've said. I know those books. I've just not read them myself, but that's awesome. You mentioned already a couple of books here. I want to end this podcast. Just give me one more minute. I'm going to end it, right? Because again, like I said, people watch it from different parts of the world. I want to end this on a slightly different note than I've ended a lot of the other podcasts, which we typically talking technical stuff and then boom, we stop recording. But here we kind of talked a few topics outside the crux of the core item here, right? The core topic, which is AI. I want to say because people hit me up on LinkedIn and ask a few different kinds of questions, right? Not It's not always technical. Sometimes it's completely non-technical. One of the questions, even if not directly so, even if it's in other, they've used different words to ask a question along these lines, is what does it mean to be American, so to speak, right? And if you're wondering why in the world would they ask this question to an immigrant, I don't know. You should go ask them that. But I've lived here long enough, so maybe I'm going to take a stab at answering this based on my conversations and based on me having lived here for most of my life, right? Here's what it is, because some of the things you said in this call actually resonated with me, right? Uh, and also the examples we've taken in this conversation. I'm not saying this is not true of other countries and other parts of the world. I'm just saying I know that this is true of the country that we live in. People I've worked with and I socialize with, it's common across the board. The attention to detail, right? If there's a few bullet points that people want to jot down to see how to better yourself, right? Assuming you like us and our country, which I hope you do, is attention to detail, right? Whatever it is that you do, right? All of these YouTube creators we talked about here, you take a problem and you solve it, but how attentive you are to the details of the issue and the problem and the solution. I think that is something I want to believe I've always been that way back home, even when I grew up. But I saw that more people were like that after I moved here, right? It was not like I had to find anybody. Almost everyone I spoke to was giving that much or more importance to attention to detail. I think that's something I get inspired by. Two is learning different crafts and being able to do many different things. I know you, Jason, when we worked together, you mentioned you were building something at the back of your house, like, you're doing some construction work. So there were skills outside your engineering skills, right? My dad has a lot of engineering skills and other skills. I grew up not knowing anything but this, right? So it's
Hmm.
almost like, some of us are more desperate than others because we don't know anything else. We don't know how to do anything else. This can be our only jobs, which is not a great thing, right? You want to have multiple skills. You want to be able to do different types of things, so not depending on other people, right? Doing dishes, doing laundry, it could be chores, it could be things outside of chores. I've seen it didn't matter whether it's your Jensen Huang, who runs Nvidia, which is a $3 trillion company. He talks of his humble beginnings and how he was at washing dishes, growing up, and the respect that you cultivate because you've gone through those phases of life is just amazing, right? I've seen
Yep.
Zuckerberg say something along those lines. Like, the one thing back home is, certain jobs are relegated to certain people just because there are a lot of people who do many different things, and you end up not respecting something that somebody else is doing because you feel like that is not important, that doesn't is not high paying, you didn't have to go to college doing that. I feel
Yep.
like in the US that the difference and separation is not, I mean, it's not perfect, right? I'm not saying this is, I'm sure people are going to be like, oh, you Krish, do you claim you live in utopia? No, not by a distance. But I'm just saying that these are things I've come to appreciate, that you don't disrespect people because you believe you're doing something more important or less important, because you've done the exact same thing in the past and you've grown over the years, right? Being independent, doing different, having more than one skill, being attentive to these details is some of those things, and the risk taking abilities, right? Not being risk averse. I see more and more people being risk averse even here these days, which to me is unfortunate. But at least the majority of people I've run into are willing to take those chances. Being unconventional about whatever it is they're doing, right? Because I think it's Albert Einstein who said, the crazy people are the ones who make a difference, are the ones who are crazy
Yeah.
about it, or something along those lines, right? I just want to capture these thoughts about at least my learnings of somebody who's come here uh, not to mention legally, right? So anybody is like, oh, did you come illegally? Yep, totally legally. Yep, no, that's not a problem there, right? Anything else you want to add, Jason, as somebody who grew up, was born and raised in the country, to this list of what it means? I mean, I don't want to be philosophical, but I think it's important. I feel like at the time and age we live in, feels like it's more and more important. So if you can add a couple things, it'll be awesome.
So I grew up in a multi-generational military household. And so I probably have a slightly different perspective. um, that and that hard work and doing things that are difficult are like, it makes you a better person, and it that the discipline, the grit, which really, if you think back to, without getting into the politically correct bullshit, but if you think back through the founding and where we are today, that you had a lot of people come to this country looking for a better life, and where, and potentially they could die with, like, trying to achieve that life. You think about all the people that were the immigrants that came in and were moving west during the westward expansion and going into unknown territory, not understanding anything, and the adventure, the risks that were associated with that. And so it's hard work is not a guarantee of success, but it is it's a force multiplier. And I think that when you talk about the American spirit and what it means to be an American, I don't think that it's uniquely American. I mean, in terms of that entrepreneurial, the risk taking, the I'm gonna go do something that's never been done before. That's not entirely unique to America, but I think because of the way that the country was formed and the fact that it was relatively short in the lifespan of the world, the people who came here and who formed who formed the country were of that mindset, as opposed to, if you look at some of even the European countries and elsewhere, completely different way of thinking about life. And that's where I think that, again, it's not uniquely American, but I think that there is a greater concentration of that outlook on life just because of how this country was formed.
Super. For the next podcast, Jason, I was going to ask you just one thing. I know you play the guitar, and I don't want to put you in a spot here, but I'm asking in the recording. I would love to do this. You don't have to answer this question, but I've always imagined having a technical conversation with a tiny bit of live music. And I have two guitars, but no skills around it. But I know you play the guitar, so if you could do that, that would be super cool. I've always imagined, I want to have a podcast where we talk technical stuff and then we take a small detour where we actually, somebody's playing something that has to do with a musical instrument. So that would be
Probably not anytime soon. I played a lot when I was in high school and college, and then I have three, and two of them actually are they're from high school, so they're 1994 is is how old they are. And I stopped playing for a very long time, but recently I've got back into, because I never really learned how to play. I picked up some tablature because I wanted to learn songs, that type of thing. And so I've been spending the last couple months actually going through and learning scale progressions and stuff. I can't play much of anything anymore beyond that. And so maybe not, maybe at some point, not anytime
sure,
soon.
maybe at some point. And if you know somebody who would like to do that, I'm able to talk any topic with them just because they were gracious enough to come and play, because I've always wanted to, I have an idea about having a technical conversation, even a hands-on session with some live music, because I don't think anybody's done that. Kind of spill the beans. If anybody's watching it, please don't do it before I do it. But that's what I've been wanting to actually do it. But this was awesome, right? This is amazing. So again, before I'm just going to wrap this up and call it wraps. Jason, anything else you want to say before I call it wraps?
No, I think I'm good. I need to get some more water. My throat's a little dry, so
No worries, folks. Again, thanks to Jason Crum, for taking time to having this conversation. This is one of a few that I want to have where we talk about AI and its impact on software developers. But we've gone past software developers. We talked about a number of different roles. We even talked some geopolitical stuff for what it's worth. Maybe if Mehdi Hassan is watching it, he'd be like, "Oh my God, there's one more." No, I'm just kidding. This is one of those journalists that I actually do watch sometimes. Yeah, this is amazing. So thanks again, Jason, for taking time. I can't wait to publish this. And folks, if you have any questions, you can hit one of us up. And I'm going to include a link to Jason's LinkedIn profile. And if there's other links you want for us to include in the podcast, Jason, just let us know. Otherwise, I'll just include a link to the LinkedIn profile.
no, that's fine. I would say any comments or things, just direct them at Krish because I won't read them.
Sure. And even if you did direct them at Jason, it's likely that our answers are going to be not very different from what it sounds like. So you would still have gotten pretty much the same answer, just with a bit more of an accent. That's it. That would be the only difference. No other difference. Yeah.
Yep. Well,
That's
I mean,
awesome.
so I'll say that now that I've changed my role, I'm no longer really going to be paying attention to LinkedIn. So even if you comment there, I likely won't read it for a couple months.
No worries. Cool. Awesome. Jason, thank you so much. I'm just going to hit stop here, but just stay on the call for a minute after that.
Okay,
Thank you. Yeah.
cool.